Everyone, or good evening, everyone. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we
Great.
can hear and see you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very nice to host you. Thank you for your, you come here and participate that organization. We want
Wonderful.
to really thank you. And
Well,
everybody is waiting for your presentation.
Wonderful. Well, it's a pleasure to be joined by such a large audience, and on the heels of Peter's presentation, I don't know if I'll be able to do you justice, but happy to share my perspective on the industry. Just by way of context, I've been in outsourcing for a little over 25 years. I started as a representative on the phone as I was paying my way through college. And so fast forward now plus 25 years, and I'm the co-owner and co-founder of Activus Connect. And Activus operates across all of the US and part of the Caribbean, providing 100% remote-based customer experience outsourcing. So my perspective will have that slant, but I think it will equally allow me to share a little bit more about where the industry is going. So without further ado, you should be seeing my slide number 2, the new normal in contact center management. Do you see that?
Mr. Felix,
yes.
Share screen please, try again. Yes.
You see now?
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. So the world of outsourcing has changed in the last year, hasn't it? And what's interesting about this change is it's accelerated the adoption of things that we largely knew, but didn't necessarily have a need for in the past, or certainly not in the way that we need these things today. And so as I talk about the new normal in contact center management, I'm going to talk to you about some of the emerging trends that we see in North America, but they're equally applicable no matter where you are in the world, to the extent that you're either servicing a client or being serviced by a BPO client. And so number one is location is now irrelevant. Business continuity is what is most important. And if I park here for a second, for such a long time, the notion of outsourcing was coined, in, at least in North America, as using a term called your mess for less, or effectively the lowest cost alternative. But the reality is that cost, while equally important today, is backseat to business continuity and the ability to always serve your client, irrespective of where you are in the world. And so now the concept of an in-center brick and mortar model, a hybrid solution, which is what we were accustomed to before, some people working from home, disproportionately most people working in center. The reality is that now that's augmented by the ability to have a full virtual model in a hybrid solution, where delivery models are now the enterprise models of today and tomorrow. So what does that really mean? Effectively, for the outsourcing industry, for the BPO sector specifically, it means that you have to have the ability to run a physical presence, understanding that there's a lot of value to having some element of your workforce working from home. But in the end, you need to be prepared for everyone to work from home when there are global events such as a pandemic, which we're all now living through. And this is going to be key for the industry as we move forward, because this inserts or introduces a number of new dynamics into the marketplace that requires that BPOs think about outsourcing and that think about their model in very different ways. And we'll touch upon those different ways here shortly. Now, for a long time, we've always looked at multi-channel communication as being an external thing, an offering that you provide to your clients, because their customers are needing to contact you via voice and non-voice channels, through social media, as that's continued to emerge as a channel of support. But in the context of today's presentation, multi-channel isn't going away, but it now plays a larger role internal to a business. Now, why is that? Well, the reality is that your target employee base operates in a multi-channel environment every day. They're on their cell phone device, they're behind their email, They're texting and chatting. They clearly engage in voice communications. And now, in order to properly engage with your labor force, especially in a hybrid model and a virtual model, the use of different means of communication are going to enable what Peter Ryan referred to previously as more robust communication channels or engagement channels. And so this is essential as you think about what the new normal in contact center management looks like. Now, interestingly, everyone is talking about virtual models. Virtual models require much more than technology. You know, many can recall that in the early days of the global pandemic, the flag of success was we were able to take our employees and move them from a physical setting to a virtual setting. And that was largely viewed as the largest of the accomplishments. But the reality is that there's a lot more that's required in a virtual environment to ensure that that environment functions at the same level, if not higher, than the environment that you were most familiar with, which is largely the brick and mortar model. So let's touch on that a little bit more. In the concept of a virtual model, the technology is the easiest component of all of the components to deploy. Adjusting your engagement model, adjusting your processes, training your people in how to work from a virtual setting, training your personnel on how to deliver training in a virtual setting, understanding the unique nuances of compliance, but overall engagement become new factors in a virtual delivery model that were not as important yesterday in a physical setting, but in the new setting of today and tomorrow, where hybrid and virtual are more pronounced or more predominant. These are essential components. And businesses really need to take a step back and look at what they have in the way of processes and personnel that could be repositioned or repurposed or redeployed. They need to be able to understand where there are gaps, largely engaging with third-party professionals in the marketplace that can help point out the nuances between the new models and help create bridge plans for those, are going to be essential as you migrate into a hybrid or a full virtual environment. What's good to note is if you had a high-performing, well-structured brick and mortar environment, you've done half of the important work to go hybrid or to go virtual. But there are nuances behind it, much or far beyond just the technology. Now, virtual or hybrid models now introduce a new dynamic into outsourcing. Captive sites are now less captive because of the new virtual landscape. So what does that really mean? Well, for many providers who set up physical centers, as you went through your consideration process and your site selection process, as you looked at the demographic data, as you looked at where unemployment rates had large populations of unemployed candidates available to work, in a new virtual environment, now your audience or your catchment area where you can recruit from considerably expands. And so the quality of the talent that you're able to attract tends to be considerably higher. But you also have to be aware of the opposite dynamic, which is because virtual means that that population can be engaged no matter where they are, it also means that your competitors can engage them. And so the race to get the very best talent becomes that much more pronounced in a virtual environment. If I use as an example today, most physical settings in the US have a very specific radius around which people will drive to a physical location. And so in that scenario, employees will be required to drive 30 minutes or 60 minutes into a physical location. The reality is now with the new virtual setting, that's expanded materially. But in expanding materially, those employees also equally recognize that they have more options available at their fingertips. Now, daily routines have really changed. And what that means is that what you knew yesterday in your physical contact center, much of that is still present tomorrow, but you need to know that there are some unique differences. Now, that is irrespective of whether you're looking at the brick and mortar of tomorrow, the hybrid of tomorrow, or the virtual of tomorrow. Some things have changed, and it's likely that they'll never go back to the old normal. Now, use of different technologies for day-to-day engagement are the biggest enhancement to daily routines. Now, this is applicable whether you're in a physical setting, hybrid, or virtual. And so what am I talking about here? The reality is that how we engage with our employees now, what devices, whether you're using an iPad, a desktop, a laptop, a phone, that new technology is the new normal going forward. And that's good for a number of reasons, but it also inserts some new dynamics, especially if you're accustomed to just engaging and using the technologies that are present in a physical setting in your physical call center. So what are some of those technologies that are different? Well, the use of engagement and communication platforms are more pronounced. If I think about it a little bit more, in the world of yesterday where contact centers leveraged intranet sites to provide information, sure, that's still available now going forward, but how you might present that information to employees is very different. So the use of different types of knowledge bases that are more accessible outside of your normal network because that key information is essential in hybrid and virtual settings. How you deploy someone with their own hardware or with a unique set of hardwares that you're not necessarily providing in your physical setting, that requires the use of technology and in compliance-enabled software to ensure that your people are doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. The use of real-time communication, such as WhatsApp, as a method of engaging with your employees during hours and outside of hours becomes more pronounced in the days of hybrid and virtual. And that's largely because that's the expectation in communicating nowadays. Now, I've had this conversation with a lot of peers in the industry, and the reality is that in the world of today and tomorrow, companies that are already had strong engagement models, they experience very little disruption in the world of today and tomorrow. So if yesterday you had very strong processes and procedures, very strong engagement models, the reality is that you will not struggle to the same extent going forward. It's a lot easier to adapt those. However, the opposite is equally said. For those companies that struggled with engagement, struggled with the communication aspects of managing a call center environment, that's accentuated in a virtual world because those same processes tend to translate over and become more difficult to manage. So what does a strong engagement model require? Well, the reality is that it requires structured communication, very deliberate engagement of your personnel, both visually as we're doing today, as well as in the recognition programs and in the day-to-day engagement that you had in center that you're now going to be taking into a virtual setting. The reality is that the technology, we use it every day. If your process was strong yesterday, your process going forward will equally be strong. Now, inspecting what you expect looks a little bit different in the world of today and tomorrow. And that's largely because, again, we're talking a little bit more about hybrid and virtual models. And so the systems are the same, but you need to take a different approach where yesterday, perhaps you were going to someone's office to inspect a QA form. Today, you're inspecting that via email or online or through direct one-to-one communication with your employee on a real-time basis while they're sitting at home and while you're sitting at home equally. Being able to ensure that compliance measures are strong. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. You know, in a physical setting, you know that a person is that person that you've hired because they've walked in through the door, they've scanned their badge, and you know them. In the world of today and tomorrow, because of hybrid and virtual models, now you have to ask yourself, where is that employee actually today? Are they actually in their home? Have they gone on vacation, taken their laptop with them and working from another country? Is that permitted? Do we want our data to be in another country? Is that a violation of our security protocols? And so these are the measures now that you have to begin to retool your organization to ensure that you're in compliance, that you're in compliance of your local regulations, as well as the commercial requirements that you may have with your clients. Now, interestingly, the platforms of today and tomorrow allow you now to do so much more of this day-to-day visual, much like we're doing on a Zoom session. That compliance related to day-to-day operations, ensuring that I'm taking a phone call, seeing what I'm typing. In yesterday's world, you could accomplish that by quite simply having the manager or the supervisor walk behind the employee and simply visually inspect. The reality is that that's all available in the world of today and tomorrow through the use of all of the technologies that you and I on this conference largely use on a regular basis. The ability to monitor someone's screen, to see what they're typing, to ensure that they're typing the right things and engaging in the right sort of ways. Now, creating balance is a new dynamic in the world of today and tomorrow in terms of daily routines. And I often get questions around this. And so I'd like to explain a little bit more. Creating balance requires a deliberate effort. The workday looks different in so many ways. Now, in the early days of hybrid and virtual, it was euphoric. There was this sense that I worked yesterday in center and now I could work at home and that's great. But now, months after, what you tend to find is a burnout factor. You tend to find both your management and your frontline employees almost feeling exhausted with the work. And this is what I'm referring to when I speak about balance. What's essential in the world of today and tomorrow is that you're deliberate around when you're working, when you are not, shutting off the camera, powering down your system. You didn't have that problem yesterday because you came to a physical location, you sat at your workspace, and when you ended at the end of the day, largely your work was done. But in the world of today and tomorrow, that line is considerably more blurred, and it's the responsibility, first and foremost, of the outsourcer to ensure that they have the right guardrails so that all of their team members are working efficiently and with high levels of productivity, but not so much that the work never stops. And the reality is that that's a real problem. It is very easy to, in the course of your normal day, get up and go and come back and be working on email or other matters because your computer is now at home. And just sitting down for 5 minutes often sucks you into a new environment where you're working now considerably more hours than normal. If that remains unchecked, what you ultimately experience is a higher turnover and attrition. Your business suffers from it, and the performance on your client side equally suffers. Now, as I wrap up today's my presentation today, I wanted to share with you some of the things that I personally focus on as a business leader. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the terms that we use in our business. Now, we've trademarked the term elevating experiences. And elevating experiences for us is about ensuring that our primary asset, and that is our ambassadors, our employees we refer to as ambassadors, that we care for them in a different way. And we do that because it's right, but we equally do that because the world is changing with respect to culture and engagement and the concept of customer experience brands. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that means for us and things that you should be aware of in the future as you're thinking about hybrid and virtual models. But even if you're not, even if you're only looking at your brick and mortar model, so that you can think about this because these are emerging trends the world over. True customer experience, which is the world that we live in. Yesterday, or many years ago, the outsourcing sector started out quite effectively as a lower cost alternative to do the same thing. But as the industry has evolved, the concept of experience, customer experience, is what is a more defining element of our industry. Before, you didn't have to please the customer that much, and I'm talking about the customer's customer. But in the world of today, where a customer that's buying from a business has so many options, this customer experience becomes so essential. But that really starts with the employee experience. And what that means for us is that your employee today has to like what they're doing. They have to feel like they're included and engaged and part of the company that they represent, your company, such that when they're representing your brand on the phone, supporting your customer and their customers, they're doing so with pride and with passion, that they're doing so from a place of understanding that they're there to assist. Now, sure, these are things that have been taught for a long time, but in the world of today and tomorrow, an employee who is not having a positive experience has so many new options to engage with other brands, your competitors, that they'll choose to go in many cases versus choose to stay with you because they are in search of that environment that is meaningful and fulfilling for them. The workplace culture is essential to the success of all PPOs. I've been in the industry for a long time, and so if I look at the evolution of the industry, there were many times when I traveled the world over, starting right in the US and in most other places, where a contact center was comprised of a big floor environment with the smallest possible cube, the least amount of distance between you and the person next to you. And the reality is that those environmental factors, then coupled with the treatment of people, had created often these pressure cooker feelings. In the world of today and tomorrow, that has to be addressed. That is easily addressed. The good news is through hybrid and virtual models, because now you're creating environments that are more conducive to positive experiences. You don't feel so crammed on top of each other, especially if you're working from home. And what this allows you then to do is to then focus on other cultural elements. So what are some of those cultural elements? Well, the reality is that because competition in the BPO sector as virtual has increased, because that competition sets a new standard every time, you have to be aware of what the right culture is for your business. Cultural elements in my business are focused around good communication, ensuring that our team knows where we're headed, the role that they play in the business, how to contribute to the betterment of our business, and that we make it fun and engaging for them. And the reality is that we don't have a project of activity that does this because it's ingrained in so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis. But this notion of culture is really essential. And so, listen, the reality is that sometimes as an outsourcer, you always have to make a tough decision. What we have found when we're adding positions or removing positions, or again, having to make another tough decision, is the more we communicate with our ambassadors, the more understanding they are. They feel more like they're part of the business, and they feel less like something is happening to them without their input. Now, the employee experience will increasingly become intrinsically linked to the success of BPOs. And that is the reality today. It doesn't take much time if you do a Google search, or if you're on social media, actually even a better example. If you're on Instagram and Facebook, and even to some extent LinkedIn, and you begin to browse, in North America, there's equally another site called Glassdoor. And all of these sites, in one way or another, are a review from the employee's perspective on the value of the company. Now, in some cases, they're unfair, but on the whole, they speak about how the business is, what the culture is. When those employees are online and they're happy with their environmental factors, they see a positive culture, they feel included and part of an organization, organically, they're speaking in a positive way about your business. Because of the advent of the internet and because the use of social media is so relevant to the employee demographic, it's essential that these employees who are engaged with your company are speaking well of it, because in the end, they are your brand. It doesn't matter how big your marketing team is. And in many cases, it doesn't matter what your marketing team is saying. If the underlying employees in the social realms aren't echoing the same thing that you're saying at the top line, then the reality is that customers see that, brands see that. And in these days, brands don't want to be, or want to be affiliated less with an outsourcer who is known to have, who is believed to have concerning culture, concerning employee sentiment and feedback, especially in the public realm. The last thing that a company wants, or that a brand wants, is to get negative press about their customer care or what their customer care may be saying, especially if they're outsourcing, about that brand. Now, 2 remaining items. The typical profile of an ideal contact center employee has already changed, and it's going to continue to evolve. So what does that mean? Well, for so long, because all of outsourcing was centered, or most of it was centered around physical locations, you were appealing to a very specific demographic. It was a younger demographic. It had less work experience in many cases. It had the ability to come into a facility. It had the flexibility to work during very different hours. And so that profile at a high level appeals to a certain sector or demographic of your available population. But the reality is that today and well into tomorrow, the concept of finding the right person, no matter where they're located, changes the profile of who you're hiring. It also changes how you hire that person. And then it builds on this concept of culture. What we typically see now is that there is a more experienced demographic now willing to work in a contact center because they may live in a rural area, but have access to all of the technology that are required. They may not have other options. They may have options. They may have worked for a long time and would like to use that knowledge, but would never go into a physical setting with tight quarters in a call center packed with a lot of people. And this begins to change the overall look and feel of the profile of the contact center agent. Now, the concept of brand voice is increasingly critical. So what am I referring to here? For so long, inherent to our industry was the ability to take a subject and to take a person and to meld them together, irrespective of whether the person knew anything about the subject. It's why we trained people and put them through nesting, and you do quality assurance. It was this effort to impart a certain knowledge on someone who didn't know much about a subject, get them to proficiency so that they can support your customer, your customer, their brand, and their customers' customers. Well, the reality is that the concept of brand voice is now changing because you have so much more access to qualified and very experienced personnel everywhere in the world. Your brand voice is now a more experienced brand voice. I would almost say that in many cases, it's a more mature brand voice, not an age thing, but it is the quality of the work experience that they have and how that lends value to the customer experience with your clients and their customers. Now, these are just some of the items that I wanted to touch on as you think about where the contact center industry is today and emerging trends into tomorrow. What's interesting about it is, as I listened to Peter's presentation, is, well, we didn't calibrate. There are so many key elements to what the analyst community is seeing in the way of emerging trends and what BPOs such as Activus Connect are experiencing on the ground operationally every single day. I just wanted to take a brief moment to thank everyone for listening to my presentation. And if there's any questions that I can ask for you, I am easily reached through social media and through the moderators of this forum today, and be happy to provide answers to any additional questions that you have. Thank you very much.